I feel like the relationship with social media changed a lot during the pandemic and really affected us even after the pandemic.
For many people, like myself, I found social media as a coping mechanism and would scroll for hours on end.
We couldn't be with our friends, we couldn't be around people, so we found another way to be around people online.
During the pandemic, it was more of I need social media to stay in contact with everybody.
And now, even though we have more freedom than before, since we had like a whole year being on our devices, it's kind of hard for most of us to just like get out of that mindset.
People just got used to speaking on their phones through social media, and so they kind of get stuck in that habit, and it can be hard to break that. Not necessarily bad, but it can be hard to break habits sometimes.
Please welcome to the stage for the panel, The State of Our Youth, Dr. Jenny Radeski, Dr. Kara Alimo, Dr. Mitch Prinstein, Cynthia Bissett-Germetta, Dr. Megan Jones-Bell, and your moderator, Dr. Warren Ang, for a panel discussion on the state of our youth.
Good morning, everyone, and it is such a privilege to be here, and especially following the inspirational leadership of our governor. So I want to say that sharing this space with this expert panel of leaders to illuminate our understanding of youth mental health and social media is really an honor, and especially something that is so near and dear to my heart as a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And I want to say that there's a quote that Maya Angelou that comes to mind, and it is a wonderful day. I've never seen this before. And with that wonderful day and this new opportunity, let us live, love, and learn together. So with that, I'm going to start with my first question, which will go to Dr. Prinstein. The American Psychological Association joined the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, in a health advisory on social media usage in adolescents. Now, can you share your expert opinion about what we know and what we don't know with regards to the impact on the mental health of youth, and what would you recommend?
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me here. We need to do a lot more research on the effects of social media on mental health, but we do know a few things so far. First, the results of research has suggested that kids all respond differently to social media. There's no one reaction that all kids have. In addition, it's not social media itself, but it's how we're using specific aspects of social media, things like the artificial intelligence or the like button that particularly play a role. We also know that social media can be quite beneficial for many youth, in particular for minoritized youth. Those from sexual, gender, racial, ethnic minoritized groups can find incredible social support, sense of community, and accurate medical information online. So it's important that we have a balanced perspective. We do know that social media also can play a role in a number of different ways that might be a warning sign, things that we need more research on to really look out for. We know that kids are being exposed to content that teaches them how to engage in maladaptive behaviors, things like cutting, and teaching them how to keep that from their parents. We know that the like button and artificial intelligence drives kids to content that makes them underestimate or erroneously assume the intentions or the attitudes of people around them, making it look like we're far more polarized or that kids are far more condoning of negative or maladaptive behaviors. We know also that a lot of kids are experiencing problematic social media use. At least 50% are reporting one symptom of clinical dependency. But last, and perhaps most important, is that we're just starting to learn how it is that the brain, the developing brain at this very important time in development, might be getting affected by social media use. And that's where we need to do more research.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prinstein. Next, I'm going to call on Dr. Jones-Bell. I think it's fair to say that everyone in this room, as well as outside of this room, has been utilizing Google or some other social media network. When we estimate that 95% of all 13 to 17-year-olds use social media and about 40% of kids 8 to 12, we can safely say that any of the social media platforms are very well embedded in the lives of many people, not only here, but also around the world. What do you believe is Google's responsibility and other tech companies in terms of ensuring mental health for youth and everyone?
Well, it's an important question, and I'm glad you used the word responsibility, because that's exactly how we think about it, and we believe all companies need to think about it. Google is interested and aims to improve the lives of everyone, everywhere, and health is an essential part of that mission. One way that we're showing our commitment is by actually having an empowered clinical leadership team. Because we believe we need this expertise, this clinical expertise. I'm a clinical psychologist myself, inside of companies, guiding the approach, being part of the cross-functional teams that are doing research, developing the technology, writing policy, and liaising with external experts, including those with lived experience, advocacy organizations, academic researchers, and others, to really inform and develop best practices that then we can work together to implement and raise the bar on the baseline experiences in digital products, but also add the helpful and beneficial features that we know can make a real difference in the quality of information that people have access to at the right moment in time, and inspire hope for people who are experiencing mental health challenges. So in addition to the how we work, Google's also taken a number of specific actions to elevate the quality of content on our platforms and build helpful features. You can really think about our work across the mental health continuum. So in the area of mental health promotion and prevention, we've recently announced several features. One important aspect is awareness, so promoting awareness and mental health literacy, which I know the state is invested in as well. We're doing that in a couple of ways. One great example is our health sources shelf on YouTube. So when you search for something health and specifically mental health related on YouTube, the first videos that you see come from authoritative sources. We've worked with the National Academy of Medicine and the WHO to define what a trusted and authoritative source of health information is, and then we've operationalized that in our products and actually label videos as coming from a licensed mental health professional, because the source matters, and this is a part of building digital literacy into products so that we're more discerning consumers of health information. We also know that stigma is a very important barrier to overcome as a society. And so right underneath that health sources shelf on YouTube, you see a feature called Personal Stories. And we've worked to empower creators with this feature to tell their stories in a responsible way, to normalize mental health and conversations about it, inspire others to connect with communities and not feel as alone. In terms of moving into prevention, we've recently announced an update to our disordered eating policy on YouTube, because for many years we've removed content that could be harmful on ads and on YouTube, but we've actually worked with organizations and experts to apply a prevention framework to our content policy. What that means is that we now remove content that could exacerbate risk factors and expose youth to content that shows what Dr. Pristine was talking about in terms of imitable behaviors. That content like weight-based bullying or restrictive eating behaviors, that could exacerbate and promote the onset and progression of eating disorders, and so we now remove that from our platform on YouTube. Next, moving into treatment, while Google doesn't directly provide mental health treatment, 3 out of 4 people turn to the internet first for information about their health. And we have 25 billion views of mental health content each year on YouTube. So we play a really important role in that treatment help-seeking journey. One way that we facilitate that is via search by promoting information through our knowledge panels about common symptoms, evidence-based treatments, ways to actually take action and get help, find providers near you. And then moving into crisis, for years we've promoted hotlines like 988 and on YouTube also for eating disorders and self-harm to help people in crisis get help. And we've recently, in response to lived experience feedback and advocacy organizations, really understanding that reaching out for help it can be really hard for people. We've added these conversation starters that have pre-written messages. We've done that in partnership with the International Association for Suicide Prevention. So you can click on these messages, and if you're on your phone, they open a text message that you can use to reach out for help. So these are just a few examples. This work is not done. Technology continues to evolve, and that's part of why we believe we need to have clinical leadership inside of tech and social media and digital health companies to really partner with the community and experts to have this work be ongoing, and look forward to continuing to raise the bar on the baseline of health promoting experiences using technology.
Thank you, Dr. Jones-Bell. And I know that conversation is going to be continuing throughout today in many of the different workshops, so I'm really excited to hear more about that. Next, I'm going to shift to Cynthia, and I have her permission to call her Cynthia, and many of you may know her. She is a phenomenal leader, as well as a mother to phenomenal leaders. And with that, I'd like to say that you've often spoken that being a mother informs a lot of the work that you do, specifically at your foundation, Born This Way Foundation, in enhancing mental health as well as the well-being of young people. I wanted to ask you, what is the advice that you would give to mothers or parents of young people growing up in this era of social media, and also what advice would you give to the young people?
Thank you, Warren, for the introduction, and also good morning, everyone. Yes, I had a long-time career. I co-founded Born This Way Foundation, but I am really here first and foremost as a mother. This is something that's very personal to myself, my daughter, and our family, because it was born out of a lived experience that we shared. And I have two daughters, both of whom grew up, I would say, at the beginning of the social media and the digital area. My daughter Stephanie, who you may know as Lady Gaga, was born in 1983, which was the onset of the internet. It was the year that AOL came about, and the beginning of the end in many ways when it comes to mean-spiritedness online. Her issues with mental health started in middle school, which is about the time, about 50% of mental health issues develop by the age of 14. So it was about that time. She graduated high school in 2004, which is when Facebook started, and just in time for her peers to target her in college. And because of the journey that she had, the challenging journey in mental health, Born This Way Foundation was formed so that we can provide resources, support, skills to young people who are struggling and who can better cope with these things in their lives. At the core of that is kindness and mental health and that interrelationship. Back to the question about advice, though, to parents. And the advice I'm giving really are lessons that I learned from the mistakes that I made, lessons I've learned from other parents, lessons that we've learned from young people that we talk to. First and foremost, there's a growing body of literature that suggests that the parent social media use is very much in relationship to the outcome of mental health in young people, particularly depression. So I think to all of the parents that out there, I advise all of us to model healthy digital behavior, not only behavior, but the attitudes that we feel and convey. I think we all come to this place with our own biases, with our own experiences, attitudes, opinions, and I think we have to learn to put that aside, with young people and model good digital behavior and teach them how to become good digital citizens on the internet. This is particularly important in light of the Surgeon General's report about the harmful effects of it. I think also teaching our youth how to use social media and the various resources that are available to them, not only in terms of the settings, privacy, adult content, limitations in chat rooms, and so on, but really talking to them about that, talk to them about the benefits, talk to them about the risks that are associated. And then I think finally, and particularly most important, is just to foster open and ongoing conversations about the use of social media. I don't think this is a conversation that you check a box and you have it once. Maybe we feel that way about the birds and the bees conversation, but not with social media. I think it should be ongoing, even weekly, where you're asking them, you know, I don't think young people separate their online and offline lives, but I think that we should when we're talking to them about it. What's happening online? What are you seeing? How are you reacting to it? How do you feel about it? These are really important conversations, and keep that dialogue open on an ongoing basis. And also learn the warning signs of a mental health issue. This is an area where I made, I think, a very grave mistake. I didn't really understand the difference between just normal biological teenage growth and a real problem. So I think learning and understanding those warning signs is incredibly important. To the youth, and I'll be brief here. First, my advice to the youth. First, I thank you for the advice that you give us each and every day. So I'm going to give back the advice that you give to us. You know, first, your feelings are valid. All the feelings that you have are real. We use those feelings in the input and advice you give us in our everyday work, informing our programs. We have youth advisors, 30 from all over the world. Some are here today. We have Livia, Jennifer, and Desmond that are here. So I invite you to hopefully meet them with me, you know, after. But I think the biggest advice to the youth is to create positive and helpful environments when you're on the internet. Seek and share resources. This is incredibly helpful, especially to communities that you identify with. We know that this can really help with not only improving your mental wellness, but facilitating coping mechanisms. And then I think lastly, find someone that you can turn to in times of crisis. My daughter talks about who's on your mental health team, right? Don't wait until you have a problem. Identify somebody now that will be there for you, and vice versa. And finally, you have a choice when you're on digital media and when you're in life. You have a choice to be kind. So, you know, choose kindness. Set an example. It makes a huge difference.
Thank you, Cynthia. I think that your leadership and really embodying the transformative power of kindness, and also inviting all of us to be on the mental health teams of young people. So I'm going to echo Dr. Prinstein, what you had shared earlier, and also acknowledge the fact that I think for myself, as a child and adolescent psychiatrist serving children and families of New York for 3 decades, I have to say that we're at a really difficult point, but we're at a point where we can make a difference. I think one of the things that I would share is that I've been privileged to serve as president of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and our organization, in partnership with the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Children's Hospital Association, with other partners, declared a national state of emergency in children's mental health in 2021. I know that was 2 years ago, and I would say that we've learned a lot during that time, but so much more needs to happen. When you speak, Cynthia, about the fact that, 1 in 5 young people have a mental health or behavioral health condition, also suicides are the second leading cause of death for young people. But when we think about the impact of all of our communities, we really appreciate that there's a disproportionate impact on youth of color, families of color, communities of color. And when we think about suicide, and particularly our American Indian, Black, as well as Latino youth are dying at much higher rates, the other thing is that we also appreciate our sexual and gender minoritized youth, or LGBTQ plus youth, are suffering and are estimated at 2 to 4 times higher in terms of their suicide rates. And I think you heard from Governor Hochul just how important addressing this crisis is at this point. I think of the wise words of Audre Lorde, there are no single issue struggles because we do not live single issue lives. And in that spirit of our intersectionality, I'd like to open this to the panel in terms of what are your thoughts and reflections on those challenges that we face. Well, I think with that, we are going to move because I think that the ideas are percolating and we'll definitely arrive at that discussion. Next, I'd like to ask Dr. Alaimo. You have a book coming out next year called Over the Influence: Why Social Media is Toxic for Women and Girls, and How We Can Reclaim It. This seems incredibly relevant, especially when you heard Dr. Hochul's really remarks on the CDC Youth Risk Behavior Survey, where 42% of all adolescents are experiencing persistent sadness and hopelessness. However, 3 in 5 adolescent girls are experiencing that. And as you heard, 20% of young people have seriously considered suicide and 10% have actually attempted. So given all of those things, I know if it's okay with you, I think that the audience would love to get a sneak peek into what are some of the pearls of wisdom that you hope that your readers will take away from your upcoming book.
Absolutely. Well, my book, Over the Influence: Why Social Media is Toxic for Women and Girls and How We Can Take It Back, will be published in March, just in time for International Women's Day. And it really looks at how social media is impacting every single aspect of the lives of people who identify as girls, women, and non-binary, but also really importantly, all of the things that we can do as users, as well as ideas for what tech companies and lawmakers can do to solve these problems. And I look at girls specifically, and one of the things that I think we don't talk enough about is how social media encourages girls to sexualize themselves at young ages and all of the mental health effects of that. And so when many girls join social media, one of the first things they realize is that one of the easiest ways to create content that will quite literally get liked is to post pictures in which you look quote unquote hot, right? And I think that that's really had a devastating impact on the mental health of girls for many reasons, not the least of which is that we're teaching girls to focus on their bodies and curating how they look for others, rather than, focusing on the key project of adolescence, which is identity formation. But beyond that, I wrote this book because I want girls and women to know that they are directly targeted by catfishers on dating apps because they are seen as emotionally vulnerable because of their gender. I want girls and women to know that they are directly targeted with misinformation about everything from vaccines to childbirth and home births, specifically because of their gender. I want girls and women to know about the really scary spate of sexual violence and new crimes that have been enabled by the internet and social media. Now it is possible to be sexually exploited remotely. So these crimes are being perpetrated from the comfort of these perpetrators' homes, and they're happening with alarming frequency. But I also look in my book at how if you are a woman professional or a girl trying to share your professional or other expertise online, you are often likely to get less followers, less engagement, less retweets than your male or boy counterparts, simply because of your gender and because people don't look to women and girls for expertise on and off social media in the same way. And some of these things lead us to pretty easy solutions, right? Like, we can all in this room today radically rethink who we follow and what we share and what we like on social media to change these things. We as users have the power to do that. But I'll say I interviewed women and girls and non-binary people across the country, as well as leading experts for this book. And the number one way that these conversations ended was by often people who are really experts in this field telling me, okay, I answered all of your questions. Now can you answer my question? I need you to tell me what I can do about my daughter's or my kids' use of social media, how I should handle it. And so I know later on in this panel, I'll have an opportunity to share some of that advice with you. But the first chapter of my book is called Girl Meets Instagram, and I offer up those answers for parents on here's what you need to do. And I know that there's huge appetite for some of those answers. So my book should be available for pre-order, I believe, next week on the Penguin Random House website, and really looking forward to sharing more of what I learned in this panel.
Thank you so much. And this is particularly important, as we know that particularly with female teenagers, about half of them have reported, because of social media, they have a more negative sense of their body in terms of body dissatisfaction, as well as peer norms, as well as social comparison. And so those are concerns that we have, and as well as 2/3 of young people experience hate and or negative comments related to who they are. So I think this is really important, and how much the gender experience is really different and how they're perceived outside. And I think Dr. Megan Jones-Bell, I think it's really helpful to know that within Google and tech companies, you're really taking a look at some of those issues, as you mentioned, in terms of eating disorders, et cetera. So next, I'm going to go to Dr. Radesky. Dr. Radesky, you are the co-medical director for the Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health at the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I have to say, I have the privilege of also serving on that wonderful coalition, and Google is represented as well. But I wanted to actually ask for your expert opinion, I think from your perspective clinically, as well as the important perspective that you have as a mother to young people growing up in this social media era. What might be some of your concerns related to the state of our youth at this time?
Thanks, Warren. And thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I grew up in New York. I spent my adolescence in Point Lookout and Long Beach, out on Long Island. So it's really nice to kind of be revisiting this experience of childhood and what, reflecting on what we went through, all the adults in the room, as well as trying to put ourselves in the shoes of youth that are growing up in a different generation with different points of view and different technologies around them. The concerns I'm going to talk about mostly take a trauma-informed lens because it's really important both for mental health and for kind of coming out of the pandemic and the collective trauma of that. And they are about being understood and a sense of coherence and meaning making. So I focus on the idea of being understood because I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician, so I follow lots of kids with autism, ADHD, learning disabilities. My co-medical director, Dr. Moreno, is an adolescent doc. So together, we really care about the different ways that kids experience the world. You might be neurodiverse, you might be gender diverse, you might be really anxious, you might have substance abuse problems in your family that wire you differently. You might be really distracted and creative. These are all the different ways that kids experience the world, and our job as we see it is to help them understand themselves, help their families, schools, communities understand them, and adapt to them in a way that says, I get you, let me help you leverage your strengths and recognize your challenges and try to build some strategies. So that sort of idea of being understood by your context is so important for mental health. I think it's a core part, a core driver, especially in my patients, because when you see yourself reflected back by your family, by your community, in a positive way or a way that says, I get you, I'm trying here, I think this might be what you're going through, it's so organizing. It really helps you as a person understand yourself. When you get reflected back at you, you're too much, I don't get you, what are you doing, you're making me angry, I need to avoid you. These are, or you need to leave school, or we can't handle you. These are messages that really negatively affect a child's sense of self as well as their mental health and their sense that they understand what they're going through and can cope with it. So I mention this because it makes sense why so many young people are going to social media to find their people, to find people like them where they can feel understood, where they can feel accepted. It's unfortunate that they, as Warren said, may also receive a lot of harassment or negative feedback about their identity or about who they are. But it is a huge driver. So we need to understand that about kids, is that they are going to social media to find this reflection back at them of, I get you, you're part of our community. The second thing about coherence and meaning making is that I think kids right now in this time of the world are really trying to make sense of so many of the crises going on around them, whether it's climate change or gun violence or the pandemic or whether it is systemic racism and bigotry. They are trying to wrap their heads around this. They have a lot more access to all of these things going on because of social media. And so they may be going to social media, and parents are too. Part of my research is on parents' media use. And I've interviewed lots of parents to understand their own emotional and psychological relationships with media. And they say too, like, I just need to escape. I just need to check out for a little bit, but sometimes my feed makes it worse. Sometimes my feed just helps me check out, but then I don't sleep as much. So we really need to understand that we're searching for meaning making. It's not always going to be the stories told through media, because right now, social media is not optimized for coherence or meaning making. Social media, the business model is optimized for engagement. And that engagement might be authentic storytelling and someone who's really inspirational, but the algorithm is agnostic to whether it's that kind of beautiful story or whether it's something's engaging because it's toxic and you just can't unglue your eyes from it. You can't look away, or you're so tempted to click it. So I'm not saying this to totally put all of the blame on social media companies for not optimizing for helping our kids understand themselves and make meaning of the world, because of course it's a really hard thing for human parents to do. But I do want to make the point that I think there's huge potential here. In my research, I have interviewed dozens of tech companies that they call themselves child-centered tech companies. They're making products knowing they're going to be used by kids. They really want children and youth to experience their digital products in ways that are meaningful, that teach them something amazing, but then let them go. They're not using metrics of engagement. How much time did this child spend on my product? They're trying to build products that they know really are experienced in a way that kids learn something and self-actualize. They're trying to build environments where kids are self-determining, have more autonomy, are more exploring, and not just following the nudges of feeds or other sort of design constraints. So I say that because I think that it's possible for tech companies to do more, to design in a way that's child-centered. Right now, they're stuck in the hard place between their quarterly earnings calls, where they need to show that they're making a profit, and all of their child design teams, which they're building, but that don't have as much power to really change the underlying business model. So I think that's where policy is really going to be crucial in helping to reset some of the tech design that kids are engaging with. Because right now, we need it to be a little bit more in support of well-being and the way kids experience the world.
Thank you so much. And I think that that really speaks to the nuance of social media. And it's not all good and it's not all bad, but it's trying to find the opportunity to really focus, as you mentioned, on the community, the sense of being understood, as well as the idea of finding meaning. So I think that that's really positive. We're going to stay with you, Dr. Radesky, and I think one of the things that's important is that we've heard from now all of our panelists in terms of the state of our youth at this time, but we can appreciate that we are in a state of a crisis, and the Center of Excellence for Youth Mental Health and Social Media really outlines some of the steps that we can take in terms of addressing this with action. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, and I really encourage you all to take a look at those resources online, but what are the top 3 pieces of advice that you would give to youth or parents to address this?
Yeah, so I love taking these concerns and acting on them, and acting on them in practical ways. We can't just sit and wring our hands and be worried about this. So we're really grateful to SAMHSA and the federal government for funding this Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health for 5 years. We're in year 1, so we're just getting off the ground. We're going to be training clinicians, teachers, community members that work with kids. We've opened a Q&A portal where anyone can submit a question to us. We do a literature review, give you an evidence-based answer that tries to be practical and action-oriented. We have a youth advisory board so that our guidance is not too patronizing or too adult-centered. So it's exciting to be thinking about how we can really change the ways families are dealing with this topic. So my three tips are, number 1, this isn't really for families to do, this is for all of us to do. We need large-scale change in the way we're talking about this topic, because only focusing on panicky, polarized discourses and arguments about it is not helping us move forward. So, whether it comes to press or society or families, we hope that having something that's reacting to this with less reactivity, more curiosity about what kids are going through, and then redesigning the systems to make it easier for them. So if we can take the temperature down a little bit, I think that kids will start to feel like, okay, the adults are curious about what we're going through. That's going to make conversations easier. So number 2, which has already been talked about, is like, how do you talk about this topic regularly with your kids? How do you open the door to a conversation that has actually felt pretty closed off because it's been either stigmatized or we're all in our own little boxes with technology. We all have our own little devices and feeds, so it can feel like we're experiencing it individually. It's also something kids expect us to come in hot and take their phone away. They expect us to judge them. And so if you can set the expectation that, no, we're just going to talk about this. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm curious. You're the expert. I'm going to center your agency as someone who's going to help make decisions here. It's not all going to be me just taking the phone away or turning off the Wi-Fi. So as a parent, you may need to take your breaths and have your own community to help you to be calmer about these conversations. It's really hard. We did not grow up with all these technologies, so we're going to have to ask lots of questions and not jump to conclusions. When we meet kids where they are through these conversations, we'll be much more effective at helping them self-reflect, helping them make informed decisions, or even helping them be a little bit more critical of what they're seeing online, helping them make the kinder choice, helping them decide, no, I want to disengage. I want to go do something else. So that's the third part, is how do you make a shared plan with your family? This is going to involve parents' media use too, so that we are getting off our devices and we're deciding as a family, what do we love, what gives us meaning, how do we feel like we're connected and communicating, what are we going to do? It might be movie nights and it might be tech-based, but it hopefully also will be dancing and playing with animals and cooking together and those sorts of things that you're going to carve out the time for. This sort of planning needs to be intentional because lots of tech use is very habit-based. It's very automatic. We do it without thinking about it. So at the AAP, we have a family media use plan tool that's online. and we encourage parents to kind of go through and have a family conversation and let the kids have some input as well, so that it's a collaborative decision making about where tech is going to live in your house, what are the different boundaries going to be, and then revisiting that conversation on a regular basis so that it's not going to be a one-time checkbox. So I think it's really important that it just becomes more comfortable as part of your language at home.
Thank you, Dr. Radesky. I think this is a process. Thank you. And also inviting the constant learner in all of us, because this field is rapidly evolving and part of the challenge is keeping up. But I also wanted to echo, I think, a sentiment shared with a Maya Angelou quote: "When we unite in purpose, we are greater than the sum of our parts." And obviously, we're going to need all of us to initiate this effort. But going back to Dr. Jones-Bell, I would like to ask you specifically, what are some of the resources or tools available to young people and parents as they're navigating the social media terrain, as well as what are some of the things that Google and other tech companies do to help with that?
Well, building on what Dr. Radesky was describing, Google has built a number of tools to really empower parents and caregivers to really supervise and monitor their kids' online experiences so that kids can enjoy the best of technology and parents can have the peace of mind of knowing that they've kind of built the right digital environment with and for their children. So a few of the features that we have available for parents and caregivers to use include the Family Link app. This is an app that enables you to get alerts about when your children kind of arrive and depart from a location. You can set up a specific profile for them, monitor screen time, and really importantly, in the context of mental health, set a bedtime, because we know that not getting enough sleep is one of the main risk factors for poor mental health in our kids and our teens specifically. And so there are technology tools that help you really control your kids' use of a variety of different Google products and apps through Family Link. The next tool is Google TV, which is a streaming platform. You can set up age-appropriate profiles for each of your children, and really you can create a watch list for them of content that you think is appropriate. They can access teacher-approved. These are apps that are reviewed by teachers that are in a special part of the Google Play Store that are developmentally appropriate for children of different age groups. And then we have YouTube Kids, which you can think of as really a walled garden. It's a separate app that is for younger children. There are specific profiles that parents can set up for preschool-age children, young children, and older children. And that has developmental guidelines for the content. We work closely with experts and organizations to fill that app with nutritive, helpful, and educational content that's also engaging for kids, like PBS Kids content is a great example. Or Sesame Street, so content that really is beneficial for children, and there are a number of parental controls that really help you create an experience that you feel comfortable with and allow that age-appropriate independence in how they're engaging with that technology. For tweens or teens, YouTube has a supervised experience for the main app that also lets you set some digital well-being controls and has a variety of different parental controls that allow that age-appropriate level of independence. I think about these tools as, I let my 6-year-old roam within the literal walls of a playground. And when we think about the physical world and space that we give our kids to feel independent and explore, we need to bring that same level of intentionality to their digital environment. And these are some tools that help parents create those safer spaces and curate the content that their kids then can explore independently. The other piece is getting back to points that were made around really digital literacy, which is a core skill that we all need, but really needs to be universally part of education for kids. We have a curriculum called Be Internet Awesome, which teaches kids about digital citizenship, getting to your point around bullying online and how to really create a positive and supportive peer relationships online, but also includes important information about online safety, how to create a strong password. I find this is helpful for parents just as much as kids. But these are a few examples. I'll say an important parallel to this is some kids don't have supportive adults or parents in their lives. And so, that is why we also have this parallel effort to raise the baseline on experiences for all people, kids with really kids in mind, and create safe online experiences by default and age-appropriate technology.
Thank you very much. And bringing your expertise as a mother, but also as a psychologist to this is so important. Next, I'm going to shift to Dr. Prinstein. I think that you have some incredible research and work in this area. What more do you think that tech companies can do to address this?
Thanks. I think there's a lot that tech companies can do, although it does fall on all of us. All of us who care about kids have some responsibility in helping here. I'm so glad to hear of some of the tools that are available at Google, and I think it's a great leadership example of what we can see with other platforms. If I buy any toy for my kid, I expect that somebody, somewhere, has looked over this toy to make sure it's not going to blow up in my kid's face or cause them any harm. I also expect that when I open up the box, there's probably going to be a little insert in there that says, don't let your kid play with this toy in the bathtub, or make sure you insert the batteries properly. Right now for social media, we have none of that. We really have no one looking over the product to make sure that it's safe for kids. And in fact, it has been built for adults. Other than what's done for advertising, I don't think we have any code that changes the experience of social media for an 8-year-old as compared to an 80-year-old. And that's a concern, because other than the first year of life, this is the most important time for brain growth and reorganization to really take a child brain and turn it to an adult brain that we're going to live with for the rest of our lives. Emerging data are suggesting that the extent to which kids are picking up their phones about 100 times a day on average, with some kids picking up their phones 500 times a day. The amount of time they're spending on their screens, predominantly for social media apps, 500 minutes a day on average, with some kids reporting 800 minutes a day. We're seeing that that's actually changing the brain. It's changing the size of the brain. It's changing the way that the brain functions and how the brain works. We see that when kids are exposed to illegal or harmful content, they have areas of the brain activate that signal inhibition. They're kind of like the brain's brakes. They tell us, don't pursue that urge or that craving. But when they see the exact same image with likes attached to it, those brain brakes, the prefrontal cortex, no longer activates. So what we see on social media with likes attached to it, with algorithms attached to it, is substantially changing how the brain is growing and how the brain responds to this information. We probably need to have a way of social media companies warning kids about how to use the products safely and well, because there are many ways to use their products very safely to develop emotionally vulnerable, meaningful relationships, to signal each other when we're experiencing a need for social support and to provide input and help to each other. But if that's not the focus right now, then what we're going to see is products that are really getting us just to use it for as long as humanly possible. And we now see that those are concerns. We want to have ways in which kids are being taught, here are the risks, and also build that social media training right into the platform. These are brilliant designers who know how to create engaging content. So why not teach us how to use their product safely right in the platform itself? And because these are for kids, this is going to be more than just doing it once. We need the platforms to be sending out boosters and reminders. And quite frankly, we need for that to be happening for adults too. Because everything we're talking about for kids, who are indeed more vulnerable than adults, adults are falling prey a bit to this as well. In our work with college students, we found that most college students who have been using social media for about 10 years say they still forget that when they see things online with a like attached to it, that doesn't mean people really like it. Maybe it was a bot. Maybe it was someone that just hit like because they were trying to be nice to their friends. They say they still forget that what they see isn't real all the time. They still find themselves making social comparisons after 10 years. Interestingly, most of them say, I wish my parents did not listen to me when I was 12, and I wish they had kept me off of social media for much longer than they had. A lot of this can be built right into the social media platforms themselves with a sense of responsibility and dedication to making sure their products are being used safely, the same way we do with every other toy or product that we give our kids.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Prinstein. I think we definitely have to take a safety-first approach when we're thinking about social media, the way that we think about toys that children have in their midst. I think it's particularly humbling when the fact that teens spend an average of 3.5 hours a day on social media, and a third of them are using it constantly. And it's affecting their sleep, their development, as well as their developing brains, which is really key. So I think one of the things that I want to acknowledge is that, echoing some of your comments, we can't do this alone. And I think one of the things that's important is that U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy, in his advisory on social media and youth mental health, really outlined the fact that this is going to be a community effort. It's not only what can the tech companies do, but what can policymakers do, what can parent and youth do, what can providers do, what can we all do together? Of course, we want to hold accountable those who have the most responsibility, but we also want to share in the solution. There's this wonderful, I think, saying by Joel Barker, and it really moves us towards the action, is that vision without action is just dreams. Action without vision is just passing time. But vision with action can change the world. So I'm just so glad that we're having this conversation so that we can collectively all change the world. And with that, I would love to go back to Cynthia, who is changing the world, and particularly in the area of leading an organization, really with the framework of the transformative power of kindness, as well as addressing youth mental health. I'd love to ask you, in terms of your experiences, as well as your daughter's experiences, what are some of the best strategies for working with youth who are struggling with mental health issues now?
Thank you again for your kind words, but I think this incredible panel and everyone in the room is changing the world. So collectively, it's going to take all of us. I might want to change the question, the framing slightly, instead of strategies to just ways to communicate with our young people. I know sometimes we think we have to feel like detectives and use strategies, but it's really fundamental ways of communicating. And we instill the youth perspective and the youth voice in our work through our research and through conversations that we have with young people. So what I'm sharing with you are things that we know work to be supportive for anybody that's really engaged in helping somebody with their struggles. And we've learned two really important things from our research. Two reasons that young people don't generally turn to adults when they're struggling and they'd prefer to turn to a peer is they feel judged, as Dr. Radetzky mentioned, and they feel like we don't share our own struggles. So it is important to resist that temptation to judge. I think for myself in particular, we are all victims of intergenerational differences. I know when I grew up, it was more kind of the time of true grit. You buck up and you get on with it and you don't talk about these things. But it's important for us to not pass those judgments on, to our youth, try to put that aside. and also be honest about our own struggles. Show vulnerabilities, be brave in having these conversations. It will help youth realize that they're not alone. Life may not always get easier as we get older, but we can learn how to cope better. And if we have these ongoing conversations and we as parents and adults are honest about our own struggles, it will be helpful to young people. Again, keep talking to them about all the things on the internet, about the good, about the bad, about the things that make us laugh, about the things that make us cry, and just keep that dialogue going. And then I think lastly, in terms of communicating with them and helping them when they're struggling, is let's be prepared ourselves. Something that we have introduced at the foundation is a training course called the Be There Certificate. It's the first ever online 90-minute free certificate. It's available in English, French, and Spanish. And it is peer-based education for not only young people, but for anybody who's an advocate for mental health with young people. I've taken the training, I have my certificate, and it's really helped me in my conversations, not only within our family, but with all young people that we talk to. And it just helps you be better prepared to learn how to listen, ask the right questions, most importantly, to direct and connect those young people to the proper resources. So being prepared with tools like that when we're having those conversations.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. The conversation is critical, and so is the listening to the youth voice and really being prepared for really receiving things that we might not expect, but we want to be there for them. So with that, I'd love to go to Dr. Alaimo and really think about the idea of sounding and ringing the alarm, specifically on children's mental health and social media. And I know that you've wrote about this in your opinion piece, but I'd love to hear more from you, specifically on why you rang the alarm and how you want to think about it.
Yeah, so obviously I'm terribly worried about youth for all the reasons we've been discussing when we look at anxiety, when we look at depression, when we look at suicide. And I promised you guys some of the answers that I offer to parents in my book. So just a few ideas I'd give you. My children are really young right now. I'm already talking to the parents of their friends because I know that if I wait until their friends have phones, I will have lost this battle. And I'm trying to get their friends' parents to sort of collectively agree to hold off on getting our kids' phones and getting our kids on social media until they're older. A New York Times reporter recently tried to pin me down on the exact number. And so I told her that I don't want my daughters on social media till they're 16, and she's threatened to put it on her calendar and follow up to see if I can do it. But I think talking to other parents is critically important if you have the time. I also think, so research by Dana Boyd and others tells us that it is a huge myth that all kids want to spend their days on social media. They would much rather be getting together with their peers in person, and the reason why they don't is because of their overscheduled lives and their lack of transportation and their parents' rules. And so we need to think really carefully about the opportunities that we do provide kids to get together in person, which my research tells me can often be much safer than going online and having more dangerous experiences. When kids are on social media, I think for girls in particular, it's really useful to steer them away from the more visually oriented platforms like Instagram. We have to teach our daughters and kids of all genders that their body is not the source of their worth, and also that the number of likes and friends they rack up is not the source of their worth, and we need to have these conversations. As we've discussed on this panel, social media is a place where kids can go online and develop their identities and their interests that can lead to careers and find their people and have positive mental health outcomes. And it can be a place where our girls go online and fall into the Fitspiration community and develop terrible body image dissatisfaction and other problems. And so when it's our kids, it's on us to help them get this right? And we have to be involved. Another really important rule, I think, is letting your kids know that they can come to you to talk about anything that happens online. One growing problem is sextortion, which certainly happens to adults as well, but is happening increasingly to children. It's when, in this case, it can be an adult, convinces a kid to share a racy image or video, and then starts telling them that they will release it publicly unless they share and do more. And this puts kids and adults at huge risk of suicide. What is incredibly devastating in a situation like that is when a kid is afraid to go to their parent because they think their phone will be taken away or they'll be grounded or whatever it is. And so you have to have this open dialogue, and your kids have to know that they can talk to you when they're in a situation like this. We've also sort of touched on this in this panel, but we have to make sure that our kids' use of phones and social media don't displace sleep and physical activity. And just the last thing I'd say, because we haven't touched on it yet, is that most kids are exposed to porn on social media these days. You might think because of their gender or because it's your child, that's not the case, but the numbers tell us otherwise. And so I would just say that regardless of your views on the subject, research tells us that the vast majority of porn online right now depicts violence against women. And so kids need comprehensive sex education that includes porn literacy, which, just to be clear, does not involve watching porn. It involves learning about how porn misconstrues reality, and this is a conversation that parents need to be having, and this is an education that we have to make sure our kids receive.
Thank you, Dr. Limo, and thank you for bringing us back to the birds and the bees, place that many young people definitely know and are learning. I would like to take the last few minutes of our wonderful plenary and ask each one of the speakers, what are one or two concrete recommendations on the next steps at the policy level? And if we can keep it to 1 minute, that would be wonderful. So if I can ask Dr. Radesky to start from that end. Thank you.
Yeah, so at the AAP, we do advocate for specific policy solutions around technology and children. The Center of Excellence does not lobby for any of these, but here are some of the features of legislation specifically that we think do support child agency to get the most out of online and social media experiences while reducing harm. So one is preventing data profiling. So kids under 18 are going through so many developmental changes that are constantly shifting their mood states, their neurodiversity. All of these things can be inferred through their digital breadcrumbs and the data patterns that they provide when they're interacting online. And sometimes you can make inferences online that you don't even know about yourself. So that's kind of an unfair fight for kids who are using platforms that can accurately predict what they might want to watch next, what they might be lured to kind of click on. So reducing and improving data privacy and reducing data profiling is really important. And that, I think, will then impact the amount of time kids are spending on platforms when they don't intend to, really helping them take the driver's seat and have more controls over what's showing up in their feed, and when they want to disengage.
So one big thing is, I think, obviously my book looks at all of these solutions for tech companies to implement. I think we also need to take a hard look at our society. So I'll just tell you one quick story of a day when I allowed my then 1-year-old daughter to watch YouTube the entire afternoon. And it was because my babysitter canceled on me at the last minute, and I was pregnant and very ill, and I put her next to me in bed, and she watched super simple songs for hours, and that's what kept her safe that afternoon. And the reason why my daughter didn't watch YouTube every day all afternoon was because I, because of my class and other circumstances, am in the extraordinarily privileged position of being able to afford preschool. I can tell you, even as someone with 3 graduate degrees and a good full-time job as a professor, if I didn't have my husband's strong income as a physician, I would not be able to afford to send my children to the preschool they go to. We know that, we know that the average rich country invests $14,000 per year in toddlers, and the United States invests $500. And so it's shocking. And we've talked a lot about adolescence on this panel, but I also think it's worth thinking about those young kids. My pediatrician, told me her worry with watching these videos would be, developing ADHD and other problems. So childcare, and then I just also need to say education. I teach social media at a university. Every single one of the students I taught this semester had never learned about social media before they walked into the door of my college class. That is absolutely terrifying. If they'd grown up in Finland from the age that they learned to read and write, they would be learning how content is designed to manipulate their emotions and how to identify altered images, and it's negligent that we don't universally have curriculums of the same quality in the United States. But one last thing on that is that a lot of teachers in the culture that we live in are afraid to veer off the curriculum. And so these curriculums need to be mandated and they need to be taught by experts with credentials in the subject.
The American Psychological Association endorsed the COSA bill, which is currently being considered in the Senate. We are happy to advise in the crafting of that bill very much. So of course we're pro that. Absolutely echoing the comments about social media literacy. If we are teaching kids how to live in a world how to survive in a world that they will live in, we are going to be living with social media for a very, very long time. So we should be teaching kids how to survive in that world. Everyone should be taught. I will say for mental health more generally, really echoing the governor's comments about the investment that the state of New York is making, which is fantastic. The federal government spends $750 to train physicians for every $1 for the rest of the mental health care system. And physicians only make up 9% of the mental health care system. So it is absolutely critical that money is spent to train a mental health workforce that looks like the communities that they are meant to serve, that is sufficient. In the United States, we should not have people waiting for months or years or having to drive hours and miss time at their jobs just to get their kids basic health care.
So a couple of comments. I think my first one is with my mom hat on, right, in terms of calls to action. It has been very frustrating, honestly, for me as a parent to wonder why is it taking so long for action and to see the deprioritization of this mental health crisis. Some days I wonder, what's it going to take? How much evidence do we need other than to see what's happening, to our youth? So I think, the governor's interest in these calls to action is incredibly important. I want to echo yours of having mental health training in schools as an early preventive measure. This is the one thing that my daughter believes to her core would have changed the trajectory of her mental health experience, is if she was better educated and if she knew where the resources were, and that's the same for myself. Secondly, I have to put on my business hat as well, and I think that it's really critical for companies, for the people that own and manage these platforms to really understand that the potential that their technology has to have a really positive impact on young people. I think we need a new point of view, right? The current point of view is fear and shame-based. There's a lot of negativity online, a lot of things that young people see, feel, hear that they should not. And I would like to see a new point of view that leans into a strength-based approach, that engages young people, that has them at the table in developing these solutions. One thing we know at Born This Way Foundation is that young people, they want to make a difference, they're very altruistic, they want to help themselves, they want to help each other, but they need, I'll call it adult scaffolding, right, to make that happen. They need our support in making that happen. You know, in some ways, social media can be like driving a car, right, for young people. Yes, it can be dangerous, but it can also get teens where they need to go. We don't want to take the keys of the car away from young people. We want them to have social media, but we want them to use it wisely. And I think that new point of view that is strengths-based and that does not hide behind things like freedom of speech, to allow hatred, to allow misinformation. Yeah. Thank you. I think we need to leverage all the resources that we have and all the creativity that we have to really prioritize mental health first before everything else and treat it as the pressing public emergency that it truly is. Thank you.
I'll say briefly, I applaud New York for covering school-based mental health services and requiring commercial payers to do that. The next frontier is prevention. We need to create economic incentives and coverage for prevention, whether that's based in schools or other places and communities. It's our highest leverage point to change the direction of this crisis.
Thank you. So in the last 30 seconds, I think I have the privilege of thanking our incredible panel and all of the illumination you've brought to this important issue of youth mental health and social media today. But I would like to say that if there's a final word, let it be the youth voice in terms of the word. And so what I do is I invite all of you, if you have the privilege of having a young person in your life, to really take the time to ask them how they're doing. And don't do it with your phone or with other distractions. Don't be multitasking. Really focus on them and say that you're here for them and you want to understand and learn from them. And I want to applaud all of the young people here in this room, as well as those that are live streaming, for all of your courage, as well as all the champions for you. There's a really important concept, and it comes from Dr. Seuss, and to the world you may be one person, but to one person you may be the world. And for our young people at this time, that level of connectedness makes a world of difference, and it can even save a life. So with that, I would like to invite all of us to this rest of this incredible day of loving, learning, and living. And I think just wanted to thank the governor for once again her vision and mission in addressing this, and also to our incredible panelists in bringing their heart to the most important thing, which is our youth and our communities. So thank you.